A space is a configuration environment that is triggered or made active by some condition. So, for example, a user space might be active when you're using a user's profile. A group space that we sort of touched on is when a certain group is active, that space will be active, and so on. And the idea is that whenever a user space is active or whenever a group is active, any customizations that she has made to her space overrides site-wide values. A configuration object is some object in a Drupal site that's used for site building or configuration. That's things like variables, context, views, and so on. It does not include content, so things like nodes, users, taxonomy, and other entities are not considered configuration objects to spaces. So what this statement really means is this. It means we can store and transparently retrieve an override for a configuration object for any space type. And the way we do that is the spaces overrides table looks something like this. We have a type and ID. So the space type goes in the left, and the space ID goes in the left. And so, for example, for an organic group, that would be an OG type space, and the group ID would be 14. Then we have a column for the object type that we're going to override, so a variable. The object ID, so it's the site from page variable, and the value for that override. So the site from page, when you're in this group, is going to be blocked. What that means in code is that if I do a variable get site from page, when that group is active, I'm going to get logged back. But when no spaces are active, I'm going to get null or the site-wide value, say no. So I'm going to demo this for you in a second. If you've never used or installed or tried opening, you're going to get a little preview here. So this is what Open Atrium looks like when you first log in. And basically, Spaces out of the box provides ways to customize two different things. It lets you customize contexts, and it lets you customize variables. And that actually turns out to be, these two things turn out to be very, very powerful. We're planning on other things that you can customize. This is where we started. And so, for example, some variables you can customize when you jump into the group view. So, for example, I can customize the features of the group. And these are all just stored as a variable. So I'm going to, for example, turn off the discussion feature, turn on the calendar, save this configuration. You'll see that my feature set has changed here. But if I jump into another group, this group still has the original set of features. So these configurations are only applicable when you're in that particular space. Now if I go to the dashboard here, what I'm going to do is customize this dashboard. But what that really means is I'm just making an override for this dashboard context. Right? So I'm just going to say add this blog teaser block to my dashboard, change the layout. And this customization that I made to this group applies only to that group. In this other group, my dashboard stays as it is. So you can actually see the overrides as they're being created. If you're more technical and have the correct permissions, you can actually see your overrides in this tab here. And you'll see that it tells you what type of override there is. So for example, this space's feature variable is what's storing what features are active in the group. It tells you, for example, that I've overridden certain this dashboard context. And if I want to revert these changes, I can highlight them and revert those overrides for the space. So I'm back to my original feature set. My dashboard is back to normal. So that's the basic walkthrough of how spaces overrides works. Now, once we had this in place, we had access to all sorts of things in Drupal that you normally wouldn't be able to sort of customize per X, right? So, for example, there's like the site front page is a good example, but I don't know if you're familiar with the string overrides module. What it does is it uses a variable and lets you override any string using the locale system. So, taking inspiration from that, I wrote a module called Spaces Custom Strings. For this group, I'm going to customize some text here. So let's go into, say, the discussion. Oh, I've already customized that. All right, I'm going to go into case tracker. And instead of calling it case tracker, I'm going to call it to use. And so on. And what that's going to let me do is it's basically just taking that variable, overriding it for the space. I'm going to turn that feature on. Oh, it's already been changed. And you can see this text here. It's been customized and I can't find it. So, so Spaces gives you access to a whole variety of customizations that originally you may not have had access to. And that's sort of the basic idea behind Spaces. So as we were working on Spaces 3, which is where a lot of this configuration stuff came into place, Alex Barth made a comment, Spaces continues to screw with your mind. Because you would do a variable get, and as a developer, variable get usually means one thing. When in Spaces, variable get can mean many things depending on what space is active. So this concept of transparent, right? We have some function like variable get or context load, and it's going to return something different based on what space is active. And so how do we do that? So another definition, we have a controller plugin. A controller is a CTools plugin that manages retrieval and storage of overrides for a given object type. So usually when you have an object load, or like a variable get, or some sort of loader function, what it's doing is it's going to its default object storage, grabbing that object and returning it. What the controller does is it sits between the object storage and the loader. And what it does is based on what space is active, it's going to load up the overrides for that active space. Or if the active space doesn't have a value for that particular object, it's just going to fall back to the object storage. Now, this system is really nice, but for example, say you have a site with 100 groups, and say you're sort of going through and customizing each group, you may have certain patterns. For example, there may be groups for, say, certain campaigns that need the same set of tools all the time. And currently, from what I've shown you, you have to go into each of those spaces, turn on the blog discussion page tracker, turn off the other features, maybe set the dashboard some way for every single group. And that's obviously tedious, and what computers are for is to make things like that easier. So we came up with this concept of a Spaces preset. And a Spaces preset is basically just a template of overrides, a collection that you can use over and over and over again as sort of a way to get yourself started very quickly with each space. So what the diagram looks like now is that instead of just two options, what it's going to do is it's going to first check the active space. Does this space have overrides? If not, it's going to fall back to the preset values. If the preset doesn't have an override, it's going to fall back finally into the object storage. And I'm going to demo that for you. So you can create new presets in Spaces that add build spaces. After you turn on the Spaces UI module. So OpenAtrium comes with two presets out of the box. It's the private group and the public group. A lot of people think these are sort of hard-coded in, they're not. They're just pieces of configuration that you can actually override if you want. of what these presets look like. I'm going to make a new group here. And in addition to filling out a title, a description, and a path for the group, I can choose to make the group either a private group or a public group. And what these are is just a collection of settings that I've saved to a preset to start off for those spaces. So when I go back to end those spaces here,